Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Two Nathan Sports. My name is Nathan Simmons, and with me, as always, is Nathan Kwan, and our special guest, our tennis expert, Thejas. You were able to go to the U.S. Open this year. What was your report?
Hey guys, thanks for having me again. Yeah, this year was actually a pretty interesting U.S. Open, right? There was a lot of people that were missing, but my personal experience actually from the U.S. Open was, it's a pretty nice experience. There's about 13, 14 courts, a couple of practice courts, and the main stadium, which is the Arthur Ashe Stadium. And we bought a couple of night passes, I think 4 night passes for the Labor Day weekend. So with that pass, we got an access to all the courts after 4 p.m. So we used to go at around 4 p.m. and watch pros practice, especially pros that would play in the evening session at Arthur Ashe. So we saw Federer practice a couple of times. I saw Venus as well, Sloane Stephens, who's the U.S. Open champion right now. A couple of other people, Dominic Thiem, the semifinalist Juan Martín del Potro. So we were able to see all these players up close and watch the games. It was a pretty fun experience, especially with the crowd going very, very, getting into the games, especially the ladies' games in the evening sessions. First few games that we saw was in the ladies was Maria Sharapova. In the last few days, we saw Madison Keys as well. So it was pretty neat, actually. A lot of people going behind Maria Sharapova and then Madison Keys. And then obviously the men's session used to be Federer most of the time. So we saw Federer twice, John Isner as well. So it was a really nice experience. I would recommend everyone to go to the US Open. You can meet a lot of fans, athletes as well. You get up close to athletes sometimes. And all these juniors, you see them walking by with their tennis bags and you're like, oh, wow, maybe one day they'll be famous and we don't even know. So stuff like that. And then I guess my most memorable experience actually was two. One, seeing Federer up close during practice. I had to wait in line for 2 hours actually to see Federer practice.
My goodness.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And I was tired because I literally had to stand. So I saw Federer practice and then the day before actually, the other experience was I saw Elina Svitolina. She's the world number 4 in women's. I saw her pass by right in front of me, and that's a really cool thing. You see them as a human person just pass by. She had just finished her match. I think it was her 3rd or 4th round, and it was a pretty cool thing as well. Those were the 2 main things I would say from the US Open. My experiences, rather, that was pretty cool.
That's awesome to hear, man. Glad you got a chance to make it. Yeah, maybe sometime in the future, either me or Kwan go there. Obviously, we're pretty much winding down on the U.S. Open. All that's left really is obviously definitely the men's final. I'm not sure if the tag titles are up, but earlier today we had an All-American women's finals after having an All-American women's semifinals. And Sloane Stephens is now the new U.S. Open women's champion. What are your thoughts on the tournament?
Oh, yeah, no, the women's draw was pretty awesome, actually. I saw Madison Keys play. She's a phenomenal player. The way she beat Elina Svitolina, I think that was her quarterfinals, was phenomenal. She just hits the ball extremely hard, very flat. She's an extremely aggressive player. That match was awesome to see. She won in 3 sets. And then same when she beat Venus Williams too. That was an amazing match. But yeah, it was amazing to see an All-American semifinal. It was since 30 plus years since this has happened. And Sloane Stephens to capture it is, it's a very memorable thing. She was not even seeded at this tournament. She was seeded number 83. She had just come back from a foot injury. She played pretty well at the 2 warm-up tournaments. I think it's Cincinnati and Toronto for women's. She made it to the semifinal of both. So she was playing pretty well. And then to watch her win the US Open is, it's an amazing to see that actually. She was playing extremely well. I saw her and actually even Coco Vandeweghe, who she beat in the semifinals, practice. Coco is an amazing player. She was red hot on fire. She was hitting the ball very cleanly. To Sloane to win the semifinals and go to the finals is actually great. And to win it as well, it's a storyline if there's a storyline at all.
Yeah, we've talked so much about the next wave of American stars in tennis, and the men's side still has a bunch of problems with that. But do you really see this as kind of the Kickstarter to a era of domination on the women's side by these players, especially with Serena and Venus kind of winding down towards the ends of their careers?
Yeah, no, definitely, especially with Coco playing extremely well. Madison Keys coming up. She's really young, She's just 21, 22. And Sloane as well. She's 23. So, and Coco is a bit older, 25, 26. So all of these three star athletes, they're breaking out. They're playing pretty well. It's really nice to see Americans come back and actually play, amazing tennis. And also, like, especially with Madison Keys and Coco, I mean, it goes to show, actually, like, the more in women's tennis, which is really surprising for me. I don't like to say it. It's a really one-dimensional game in a way because they just play flat and very hard. Their shots are very crisp, very well timed. It's rather than, finesse and so on forth. It's just with raw power. So that's actually been the new style, I guess, of like baseline hard hitters. And Americans are producing that very well. So I'm excited to see what American tennis has to offer in the women's. And then there's also, I saw another match, actually, Sharapova versus this girl named Kenin. I think it's her first or second US Open. She was 18. Again, she's another wave. She played very well against Sharapova. Obviously, by the second and third set, she was kind of worn down. But it goes to show American tennis there's a lot of promise. Even the newer generation, 17, 18-year-olds are coming in. There's a lot of Americans coming in as well. So it's really nice to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, it feels like it's been forever since like we've had like the next wave of American women coming through. I mean, I remember when back in 2003, 2004, when there seemed to be this next wave of Russian women that were going to take it over, being basically spearheaded by Sharapova. But now it looks like it might be the Americans' turn now.
Right.
And so it's nice to finally see some like new blood coming through. I mean, hopefully there might be something that comes through on the men's side for the Americans. But at this point, beggars can't be choosers when it comes to this. So speaking of which, let's talk about the men's side. There were a lot of missing players, as you mentioned, but there have been some pretty good matches so far and some decent upsets.
Yeah, no, hands down. So yeah, let's go with the first thing that you mentioned, which is that a lot of players are missing. So I think the statistic is like 5 out of the top 10 are missing from this tournament. I mean, everyone has an injury. I think Djokovic has an elbow or shoulder injury. Murray, kind of to my annoyance, he last Friday, the day before the tournament started, he pulled out because of a hip injury. Same with Stan, he has another injury, and Kei Nishikori and Raonic. So all of them pulled out because of injuries. Especially with Murray and Djokovic, I think they're following the lead that Federer and Nadal have been doing. I think the last year they took about 8 months sabbatical and came back and are dominating. So I think they're trying to follow their cue. And as far as I know, Djokovic is not going to play anytime this year, and Murray's going to play one exhibition match against Federer, and I think he's also out. Because of that reason, a lot of players actually had a breakout year. Going back to the topic that you were talking about, is the young wave of American men coming in. Actually, there is two that is very promising: Frances Tiafoe and Jared Donaldson. They both are very young. I think Jared is about 20 or 21. Frances is not; he's just 19. Frances Tiafoe, he pushed Federer to 5 sets. So 19-year-old first US Open against Federer. I think it was at Arthur Ashe as well. Pushing Federer to 5 sets is a memorable thing to do. And then in Cincinnati, he beat Alexander Zverev, who was seeded number 4 at this tournament. And then he made a small run there as well. So American tennis players there are actually doing pretty well. That goes to Jared Donaldson and Frances Tiafoe. Those were 2 small breakout stars. And I guess the biggest breakout from this year's US Open was Rublev. I watched him play actually at the US Open, and my God, that boy can hit the ball well. He plays the ball well, hits it very crisp, sharp shots. And it's just not raw power. He's able to play the ball pretty well as well. I watched a lot of his games, and I didn't make too much about it, but he played Nadal in the quarters this year. The first time. He's a 19-year-old again, breaking out, and he made it to the semis. It's a great story. As I think Nadal was saying, that this guy is going to be an next-gen superstar, and I mean that's amazing to see. Another key player, Shapovalov. I think I'm saying his name. Hopefully, I'm saying his name correctly. He played in Montreal earlier this year, and he had a huge run. He beat Nadal earlier this year. 4 weeks ago at Montreal, and made it to the quarters to semis there. And here as well, he beat Tsonga in the first round. And I watched that match actually. It was on TV, but I watched him play Tsonga, and it was a very convincing win. It was a straight 3 sets win without any mistakes from Shapovalov. He lost in the second or third round, I think 4th round, but still he made it that far as a 17 or 18-year-old. It's nice to see. He's a young Canadian. Those were the two. And actually, the biggest upset, one of the biggest upsets was the number 4 seed, Alexander Zverev. He beat Federer in Montreal this year, and he won the ATP Masters 1000. I think it was the second time he won a Masters 1000. And he's just, again, very young, 21, 22-year-old. He's actually a breakout star already. He's in the top 10, top 5. And people were expecting him to go far and actually maybe even win the US Open with the lack of, Federer being injured. And Nadal was shaky, he did not play too well at the 2 warm-up tournaments. People expected him to go that very far, but he did not. But I mean, apart from that, actually, it was a very good tournament, right? The men's side had a good storyline. Delpo, who won the US Open in 2009, had a lot of injuries, but he came out strong. I watched it, actually. I was live at the match when he beat Team in 5 sets in the 4th round. It was an amazing match to see. He played amazing. He was down the first 2 sets, came back in the last 3 sets, and just was on fire. Delpo coming back was nice to see, but I mean, he lost to Nadal in the semis. That loss that actually proved that Nadal is just back on top, and Nadal was literally untouchable. When Delpo played Federer, his forehand was on fire, and with Nadal too, he was not as lit as with Federer, but it was pretty good. But Nadal was just able to tranquilize and just beat up Delpo, and which was hard to see because Delpo is a very good player, but I think he got bageled one of the sets. My 2 cents is just Nadal is just playing phenomenal. And then again, coming back to the other storyline I was saying about Rublev, Nadal also beat Rublev in straight sets, which is like Rublev, I thought it was actually going to beat Nadal. So Nadal is just on fire at this tournament. There's nothing that can touch him.
Talk about Roger Federer. So he started off the year so well. He won the Australian, then he sat out the French Open and the whole clay season. He came back and won Wimbledon. So talk about his play at this tournament, and also talk about Kevin Anderson and Pablo Carreño Busta.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's go with Federer first, right? I mean, yeah, he's had an amazing year. It's like almost like a breakout year in a way. Winning 2 Grand Slams at age of 36 is, it's unheard of. Like actually when he played in Montreal, he had a back injury when he was in the finals against Zverev, and he sat out Cincinnati. That's another Masters 1000. Federer has won like 7 or 8 times, 6 or 7 times. So he had to sit that out. So, like it was coming in, people were, already saying that Federer was injured. And it was shown in the first 2 rounds when he was pushed to 5 sets against Tiafoe and Yuzhny. And he's been in Yuzhny 16 times in a row or something. And all the times it was a straight sets. And first time, being pushed to 5 sets, it's hard to see. But Federer was injured at this tournament. It was kind of obvious. He played a bit better against Kohlschreiber, and then the next match after that. But still, like, it was kind of obvious that Federer was not playing at the peak of his game. I was seeing his interview when he played against Delpo. He was saying, yeah, like, if there's a good player that played me, I knew I would lose. And Delpo came in, was firing, and he lost in 4 sets. It's as simple as it is. Federer was just injured, and he could not play as well. But going forward, actually, I mean, in his interview, Federer also said, like, hopefully he can come back by the next 2 weeks and have a good end of the year, end of the season. And he also said, like, he's usually very good and in shape when he plays the second half of the season. And hopefully we can see that. And then to the other side of the draw, there were 3 players actually that were playing pretty well. Busta, Diego Schwartzman, and Kevin Anderson was actually a break. I mean, I did not expect him to go that far. Schwartzman was playing extremely well. And Busta too. Busta actually did not lose a set until he played Kevin Anderson in the semifinals. And I was telling Nathan earlier, so there's an interesting story with Busta. When he was 16, he was not really passionate about tennis, but people around him pushed him to go play, go pro. So he went pro, and 9 years later, he's in the semifinals, which is, amazing to see. But yeah, let's talk about Kevin Anderson. He as well, again, we're seeing this pattern of people who are injured and coming back and playing extremely well. You saw with Federer, you saw with Nadal, and now you see with Sloane Stephens. He was also injured for the good half of last year. He came back, and for the first time, he's in the finals. He's a big server. He plays, serve and volley player, over 6 feet tall, 6'6". He and Nadal are like, a couple of months apart in birth, so they both know each other since they were young. That's what Nadal was saying. So it's going to be a nice matchup. But the way that Nadal is playing, I don't think anyone can touch him right now. Kevin Anderson has to play there has to be some magic for him to win, to beat Nadal. He has to serve extremely well. Yes, his ground strokes has to be on point. and he has to keep the points extremely short to actually beat Nadal. As soon as the point goes more than 3 points, it's hands off to Nadal. But it's nice to see Kevin Anderson come to the final, but placing my bets on Nadal straight sets.
Thank you so much, Thejas, for coming on.
Yeah, for sure, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, man.
Cheers.
Okay, so let's move on to some MLB. And first, we'll talk about the Texas Rangers, who are in a dogfight for the wild card. Give us their report, Nathan.
Yeah, so the Rangers right now, they're winning a bit more than they are losing, but like they really need to step things up a bit in a way. I mean, like they won the series against Los Angeles Angels and they won the series against Atlanta. And honestly, they've been winning 7 of the last 10 since the Oakland sweep. And they won the game last night against the Yankees, but then ended up losing today's game because they couldn't put up enough runs, while Alex Claudio and the rest of the bullpen ended up kind of just letting 2 runs go through in the 9th there. But that also being said, this is not really anything new with the bullpen. They had a lot of struggles with the Los Angeles Angels series. They really need Bush or Kella back, or really, honestly, at this point, both. Ricky Rodriguez and Leclerc are the main ones who are struggling. Grilly also struggled. And a lot of guys are being put into high leverage situations, even though they can't really handle it. That also being said, I have to give credit where credit is due, and that, like, at the end of the day, they were still able to win 7 of the last 10. And that has a lot to do with the fact that the bullpen is bending but not breaking. But now, that also being said, you're also running into a very dangerous thing, which is that you're overusing Claudio or Diekman. And at this point, like, once Bush and Kella come back, those 2 might end up going on the DL, and then you're already down depth all over again. The good news is also that in terms of pitching, starting rotation has actually been pretty decent. Martin Perez has won his last 7 games, and looks like he's just like sort of like beginning to figure things out. I mean, he's not someone that's going to be completely shutting down the opposition every game, but he's someone that has a 3.15 ERA over that span. Him winning 7 games in a row straight is the most since Kenny Rogers in 2005. And back then, I mean, Kenny Rogers was pitching like an ace. Hamels, though, has been, unfortunately, as good as Perez is. Hamels has been just as disappointing. I mean, it's kind of reminds me a bit of last year when Hamels started running out of gas towards the end of the year, and it's beginning to look like Father Time is catching up with him a little bit to some extent. And I mean, he was someone that you were kind of depending on to like step up in place of Yu Darvish, and like, I mean, you're already seeing Martin Perez do it, but like, unfortunately, Cole Hamels has not been able to fill that void all that effectively. Elvis Andrus has been hitting it very well, and he ended up joining the 2020 club. In other words, 20 home runs, 20 stolen bases. First time in his career to ever do that. He's one of only 3 people to do it this year among MVP candidates, Mike Trout and Jose Altuve. He has a slash of 375, 429, 844 with 4 home runs and 14 RBIs in 7 games since Beltre got injured. Honestly, been an amazing offensive threat. Honestly, I don't remember seeing him ever being this good with the bat since the 2015 ALDS. Trios has been pretty good as well. He has 23 straight games of getting on base. Mazzara, prior to this game, had 3 straight games with a homer. The Rangers are still 3 games behind Minnesota for the wild card and are only 1 game behind Los Angeles Angels. They've now passed everyone, so they're right now the team on the outside looking in terms of wild card. So right now, the big thing that's going to be for them to do is to focus on finishing out the next few series. They finish the series against New York tomorrow, and then they have 4 games against Seattle, and then they'll be going to Los Angeles to play Los Angeles Angels. And this one could very well end up deciding who's wildcard team.
I would just make a comment. I mean, you guys have passed Baltimore and Seattle, but they're sitting within 1 game back. Kansas City and Tampa Bay aren't completely out of it, although they're falling further and further back as well. My question to you at this point is, do you think that they can make the playoffs? It's right there in front of them. They have so many games against teams around them in the race. Do you think they can get there?
I think they can get there. I mean, it's just like, okay, so with this team, it's just pretty much this entire season, they've really been like a 500 team. And like, this is about where they've sort of been. But you look at also their run differential, and it's plus 43 versus like the Angels, who only have like a plus 10 run differential. So, I mean, in terms of Pythagorean, like they're actually underperforming. But that also being said, it's still wide open. I mean, the big thing that they're going to have to do is A, have some more people really step up in the bullpen. B, I mean, obviously the injuries to the lineup have been horrendous. I mean, losing someone like Beltre has been really harsh. But I also, I mean, really, it might come down to also just like someone like Cole Hamels being able to step back up again and like really start performing up to what has the potential to do. I mean, like he ended up losing to the Atlanta Braves the other night, and so that's not exactly something you want to see from someone that you were hoping to be your kind of your ace once Yu Darvish was traded away. The fact that they're still in the race, again, at this point, you kind of have to accept that fact that they, even after selling at the deadline, are still very much a team in the hunt. And so I'm at least thankful for that. That's something that is making at least the stretch run here somewhat enjoyable.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. Minnesota is playing so well right now. And you look at their upcoming schedule, they have series against the Blue Jays, the Padres, Detroit Tigers, actually 2 series against the Tigers. So that's a fairly soft schedule for them. They also have a series with the Indians and the Yankees, but I think the way they're playing, it's going to be tough for them to blow that lead, but we shall see. On the Houston Astros side, the week started off great. The Astros pulled off 7 straight wins. Everything was going well, and the past 48 hours, they gotten blown apart by the Oakland Athletics, but overall, this past week, Justin Verlander was great in his first start, 6 innings, 1 run, 7 strikeouts. He was everything the Astros hoped he would be in his first start. Let's hope he keeps it going down the stretch run and into the playoffs. Lance McCullers made his return off the disabled list. He was okay, had 5 1/3 innings, gave up 3 earned runs, 4 strikeouts, only threw 74 pitches, but hopefully he can take the last 3 weeks of the year to get back to form and possibly be in line to start game 3 of a playoff series. Cameron Maybin, a very underrated acquisition at the trade deadline, but he won 2 games, frankly, this past week with go-ahead 2-run homers in Seattle. He had 3 home runs in his first 16 at-bats. And so, as Nathan mentioned, when we got him, he's a guy that can serve as a 4th outfielder and also just provide that power off the bench as well as his speed. As far as the pitching, it's been okay. As we mentioned, the top 3 with Verlander, Keuchel, and McCullers looked really good. The rest have been very iffy. Mike Fiers has probably made his final start as a Houston Astro. He got moved to the bullpen. Probably won't make the playoff roster at this point. Brad Peacock is playing right now. It's likely his final start as well because Charlie Morton and Colin McHugh are going to probably be the 4th and 5th starter going down the stretch. And Peacock has worked effectively out of the bullpen this year, and he'll probably be a weapon potentially in the playoffs as a long man coming out of there. I mean, Colin McHugh also did leave the game last night with a finger issue, so that could leave Peacock back in the starting rotation for the foreseeable future. As far as the offense, Carlos Correa returned Sunday, and he's looked pretty good, has a couple RBIs this past week. The guy's really on fire right now. It's Josh Reddick. He had 12 RBIs in the past 7 days, which is ridiculous. He's been hitting at the top of the lineup the whole year, but with Alex Bregman's emergence, he's moved more into the middle of the lineup at the number 5 hole. So he's getting more RBI opportunities, and he's certainly providing them right now. And then George Springer finally heating up after coming off the disabled list. And Martin Gonzalez shaking out of a slump as well. So offensively, they seem to be coming back to life in September, which is much needed because they were collectively in a huge slump throughout August. Right now, that fight for the American League home field advantage looks like they're going to lose it at this point because the Cleveland Indians have just decided that they're not going to lose any more games this year. They have won 17 in a row. And at the moment we're recording this, the Astros have a half-game lead on the Indians. The Indians also own the tiebreaker as they won the season series 5-1. So, I mean, the way that they're pitching, the way that they're scoring runs, Cleveland looks like they're probably in line to get the American League home field at this point. The good thing is the Red Sox have been struggling a little bit. So, the Astros have a big enough lead of 6 games over Boston that I don't think they would drop all the way down to the 3 seed. But still, I mean, I personally just want to see them get that pitching in line and get the guys are going to be in the playoffs to make those starts, and then offensively find some consistency and hopefully ride a hot streak going in. But this upcoming week, they finish up their series against the Oakland A's, and then they go to Anaheim to face the Angels, and then they come home for their final homestand, starting with a series with the Seattle Mariners. But let's move on to the NFL. And let's talk about the opening night matchup between the Chiefs and the Patriots. I guess, what are your thoughts on the game? New England came out with their rings, and then everything kind of fell apart.
Well, I would say, like, at the beginning, it seemed like another easy Patriots win. I mean, I wouldn't say that it was like smooth sailing necessarily, but they seemed to be in control for at least the first quarter and most of the second, I would say. But it was really the second half where the wheels started to fall off for the New England Patriots, and they just seemed to be unable to get to Alex Smith or really stop that run game. I mean, Kareem Hunt, he completely exploded. I mean, like I didn't draft him on my fantasy team, but the person who did left him on the bench, and they left off 40 points, which, I mean, like, obviously you don't want to, like, yeah. Yeah, like, I mean, and you don't want to reduce someone's like value to just like how much points they put up in fantasy. But this guy was picked in the third round of what was considered a pretty strong draft for running backs. And just the fact that he was able to do this right off the gate against the defending Super Bowl champions is pretty much like, that's something that you're going to remember the rest of your life, especially since this was technically his debut. Secondly, also, like, Alex Smith was looking real good. I mean, I know he gets like ragged on a lot, and even within his own like fan base, specifically. I mean, like, you look at the fact that they ended up trading up to go pick Patrick Mahomes in the first round, and it seemed like the end was near for Alex Smith, but he was able to put up 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and it was pretty good, pretty good for him. This Kansas City offense just really exploded. And then also you look at someone like Tyreek Hill, who, I mean, before last year, like, he was someone that was getting some Rookie of the Year considerations, but was someone that was seen as more of a really great like kick returner. But now he's showing how good he can be as a wide receiver. And so you have a pretty strong team going forward, and it's going to be interesting to see whether Alex Smith can retain that form going forward, as well as also whether or not Patrick Mahomes at any point begins challenging or something like that. But I mean, at this point, this has to be a great situation if you're Kansas City, because before you were worried about your offense, and then like your offense posts like 40 plus points against the defending Super Bowl champs. Your defense also really held up well, although part of that, I think, is just this New England team is definitely struggling to put points on the board without Julian Edelman. You look back to 2015 and how that team pretty much stalled once Edelman went down towards the end of the season, and now it's kind of the same thing all over again. And Tom Brady is beginning to show his age a little bit now that he doesn't have someone as consistent as Edelman and as fast as Edelman to throw to.
You think it's a big problem going forward?
Yeah, at least they're more prepared this year, specifically after the trade for Brandon Cooks. I mean, it might just be a matter of Brady and Cooks getting on the same page and like learning to do that stuff. But let's also be honest here too. This is a New England team that, quite frankly, was very lucky to be able to win the Super Bowl last year, in spite of the fact like they were probably the most dominant team in the AFC. But I mean, like, you look back at that game, they, like, obviously, like, it's a meme now, but they were down 28-3 by halftime, and so the fact of the matter is that like if a few things hadn't gone their way, they wouldn't exactly be the defending Super Bowl champs. And so now it's just a matter of whether or not they can replicate it. And they've been so dependent on Tom Brady to carry the offense, and now it's just like he's pretty close towards the end of his career, and we'll see how that goes.
Even if they're not as good as they were last year, that division is so terrible. The Miami, Buffalo, and the New York Jets, they're gonna cruise into the playoffs with probably 11 or 12 wins. So whether or not they get past a Pittsburgh or Kansas City or Oakland, I think is going to be their issue, but I think they should be fine. I think for my impression of this game was, holy cow, Kansas City is a legitimate AFC Championship Super Bowl contender. I mean, we know about how great their defense is, their front seven, defensive backs. I mean, they did lose Eric Berry for the season, so that's going to be a huge loss. I mean, he's an all-pro and coming back from cancer and all that. But I mean, if they can get that production from Alex Smith, and top running back was out too, they and Oakland are going to have a dogfight to win that AFC West. And I mean, it's going to be fun to watch who comes out of there with that. But let's come closer to home and let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Let's start off with the running back position. So the latest news is right now, Ezekiel Elliott will be playing this year, and I guess that's good news for defending
for the Cowboys. Champion. Yeah, I mean it's good news in terms of on-field production. I mean, I will say this: it just further highlights how shameful like the NFL is, because it's just like, Like, I mean, like they couldn't even like find a way to have this hold up. So then why did you do this in the first place? You know, and I mean, again, like there's been a lot of talk about like whether or not like the evidence they were able to take was actually like substantial enough to levy such a suspension. But it's just also like at a certain point, you gotta, if you can't give out fair enough punishments to the point that like people are literally challenging them in federal court and they're getting overturned, or like they're getting injunctions necessarily, then you shouldn't be handing out these punishments. Okay, like either make sure that you do a thorough enough investigation to go do it, or just be transparent about it. Yeah, 100%. And going back to our talk before, is just like, you know, if they'd been transparent about it before and like really like specified why it was like pretty much half this, like 6 games, then like maybe like they wouldn't be having this issue. But like here we are, and now Zeke is looking to probably be able to play the rest of the season. I mean, barring injury. I mean, so make sure that you actually have like something that can stand up. But like, at the same time too, like I'm just sort of equal parts done with the whole situation. I really didn't care either way at this point, because it was just sort of like I was just so thoroughly just like disgusted with how everything was handled by all parties. I was disgusted by how Jerry Jones handled it. I was disgusted by how Ezekiel Elliott handled it. I was disgusted by how the NFL handled it. And it's just like,
yeah,
you know,
I totally agree. And we watch all different types of sports. I don't remember just like watching the NBA or watching Major League Baseball and hearing all these lawyering terms and, you know, so injunction and file a lawsuit. I mean, this is absurd. This is a sports league. Like, I didn't know you need a law degree to watch the NFL. It's getting to the point where it's just ridiculous.
Well, I mean, you don't need a law degree to watch the NFL, but you definitely need a law degree in order to like understand how the NFL is run.
Yeah.
So I mean, that also being said, like, again, like it's not about whether or not they're making things too complicated. I mean, like each league has something to do with law and legality.
Sure.
And I mean, obviously, like you always like most famous example of that stuff is like whenever they try negotiating a new CBA, and it's
right
between the Players Association versus the Owners Association and stuff like that. But it's just like you see all these other leagues and they're just like far more competently run. Like, I mean, it just comes down to that. Like, I mean, if Adam Silver started doing something similar to this, like, yeah, you'd start seeing like people taking this to federal court and like getting injunctions. But Adam Silver doesn't do that because he's at least more competent than Roger Goodell. Now,
yeah,
you know,
I mean, it's really not difficult to be more competent than Roger Goodell. But regardless, let's talk about the play on the field. And I guess just your preview of the season in general, it seems like the offense will again be the strength of the team. It will be Dak Prescott in year 2. But I guess for me, my biggest worry if I were a Cowboys fan is that defense. I mean, is it going to be good enough to take this team further in the playoffs than last year?
I mean, like we've always had that question every year for the past 2 to 3 years. I mean, I will say this, like Rod Marinelli has been a wizard in getting the most out of his players here. And the thing about it this time around is that like this team should be at least about as talented as the one that they had last year. I mean, granted, like, yeah, it's gonna hurt that they don't get to have David Irving to start the year since he was playing so well at the beginning. But like you have Taco Charlton, who's been pretty great during the preseason. And then you have Sean Lee, who is the only Pro Bowler from that side of the ball for the Cowboys. Now, granted, obviously, he's now struggling a bit with injuries, which he's always like struggled with. And like pretty much like last year was the anomaly, and basically saw him be healthy the entire year. And he's also at the same time, too, he's pretty much the heart and soul of this defense. And however he goes, the rest of the defense goes. And it's going to be interesting to see, though, how Jalen Smith is able to hold up. He's someone that's like very much like still in the midst of kind of coming back from missing an entire year due to a torn nerve. And it's just sort of going to be interesting going forward. And it's all, another thing that's going to be really interesting is to see how the secondary holds. Like they've replaced pretty much everyone except Byron Jones, who's in his 3rd year, Anthony Brown, who's in his 2nd year, and then Orlando Scandrick, who's now the veteran of that group. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they can hold up in the same way that the secondary held up for most of last year, up until pretty much the last few games. But yeah, like you said, like the offense is going to be the big strength of this team. Now, obviously, there are some injury troubles along the offensive line, especially since like they lost two of those pieces over the offseason. One, Doug Free retired. The other because he signed somewhere else in a much deserved contract. But as of now, I mean, they still have three Pro Bowlers on that offensive line, so they still should be like pretty fine. Dak Prescott should be in the preseason. He was looking really good, so he should be just as good, if not better. And like, I mean, considering how last year he was a Pro Bowler, like that should speak well for him. And then now that he's going to have Zeke for the rest of the year, there's not going to be as much pressure for him to carry this offense. Now that like Zeke is going to be able to at least divert attention from the passing game. What's going to be interesting also is going to be seeing whether or not if Des Bryant can hold up as well as Jason Witten, if he can hold up as well. And B, if anyone else can really step up in the receiving core. I mean, like Cole Beasley was able to, but Terrence Williams, like they were able to re-sign him, which was to me was a surprise, just considering again that Terrence Williams was a decent number 2 wide receiver, he wasn't exactly a world beater that took attention away from Des Bryant all that well. But that also being said, this is a team that should have a good chance of winning the NFC and being able to represent it in the Super Bowl. Like this team has that potential. It's just whether or not they can focus on stuff on the field, not get distracted by off-field issues, not get in trouble with off-field issues, considering like how crazy they've had an off-season. So many people either getting arrested rightfully or wrongfully.
Okay, so if I'm going to give you Las Vegas's over-under on 9.5 wins, are you over or under?
Over. I would say this team has a pretty strong shot at winning 10 games, especially now that Zeke's going to be playing the entire year.
Okay. And then briefly, I guess let's just preview this weekend's game as the opening night on Sunday Night Football against the Giants. Looks like these two will be the front runners for the NFC East. The Giants have a great secondary and their offense, we know with Odell Beckham and Eli Manning. They don't really run the ball much, but I think that secondary of Janoris Jenkins, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, and Landon Collins, who do you think wins this one?
I think the Cowboys probably do, just because, like, again, I mean, granted, they really struggled against the Giants last year. Absolutely, they did. I mean, that was the team that really that was able to beat them consistently. But that also being said, like, this should be a very winnable game for the Cowboys. They just have to stick with their guns and just make sure they run the ball, and then have Dak do his thing, not risk too much. I mean, like you definitely worry about the Giants defense, which was one of the best in the league last year. And like you said, one of the people you mentioned, Landon Collins, was a big reason for that. But that also being said, like they don't really match up well against the Cowboys offense in so much that, again, like this team is very good at running the ball. And the other team isn't exactly as well known for stopping it. Although they do have Olivier Vernon, so that maybe that helps. I'm not too sure. But that also being said, I think it's the Cowboys. The Cowboys win this one. What's going to be real interesting to see too is also whether or not this Giants offense is really as good as people are saying. I mean, Odell Beckham has had some injury concerns due to something in preseason. And so it's I think he's still technically questionable for this week, although I believe they're leaning towards letting him play. But like they also really revamped that receiving core by adding Brandon Marshall. But I mean, at this point, like the biggest thing that's really holding back this Giants offense is Eli Manning. I mean, like, yeah, they really don't have a strong rushing game, but it's always revolved around Eli Manning. And outside of winning 2 Super Bowls against the Patriots, of all people, Eli Manning hasn't exactly been all that stellar, especially during the regular season. And so, like, really this year, outside of blaming the non-existent run game, like there's really no excuses for him in terms of underperforming.
I'm going to pick the Giants just to play as a foil to you, but we shall see. That's Sunday Night Football.
Yeah.
Let's, I guess, talk about the Texans preview for the year. It's going to be, I think, similar to last year. The defense is going to be the strength of the team, obviously. A lot of people have the Texans as having the best front seven in football. I don't know if it's the best, but it's going to be top 3. I mean, last year, this was the number 1 unit, and they didn't have J.J. Watt for basically the whole year. And you're getting JJ Watt back on the front line with Jadeveon Clowney, who's coming off a breakout year, and then also Whitney Merciless. So that's a three-headed monster with your pass rushing. Hopefully your linebacking core, Brian Cushing, continues to hold up. You have some question marks in the secondary. I mean, they did lose AJ Boye in the offseason, but they're hopeful that Jonathan Joseph can have another strong year. And then Kareem Jackson and Kevin Johnson, who was their first round pick a couple years ago, he can develop more into a shutdown corner. And then, their safety play should be pretty good with Andre Howe back there. The weakness, obviously, is the offense. I mean, it was terrible last year. Obviously, a lot of that was due to the quarterback play with Brock Osweiler. And so they're going to start the year with Tom Savage at quarterback. And then, we'll see how it goes. He had a pretty solid preseason. And, they're saying all the right things about him, how he's a leader and knows the offense and it's his time to shine. We'll see how long that leash is. If he struggles, you did spend a lot to get Deshaun Watson, and he's probably going to be in there sooner rather than later. But, other than that, receiving core was pretty poor last year, a lot of that due to the quarterback play. But DeAndre Hopkins, whether or not he can turn that big contract he got into consistent production week in and week out is a question mark. And then obviously the biggest question mark of all is that offensive line. We talked about this throughout preseason, but Dwayne Brown is not going to be there for the foreseeable future, and they're going to have to play with a bunch of fill-in guys. And this offensive line was ranked 29th last year by Pro Football Focus. With Dwayne Brown, they're going to be probably worse without Dwayne Brown. And so I'm not very high on that offensive line. And in the end, Vegas has the over-under on the Texans at 8.5, and I think I'm going to go barely over at 9 wins because they're just 9-7, 9-7, 9-7 under Bill O'Brien. And why not another 9-7? They have a pretty tough schedule. But if you're going to tell me they're not going to win 9 games, I'm going to have to go under because I don't really see, based on this offensive line, how they can get to 10 wins. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, no, this offense is going to be a real problem for this team going forward. Now, that also being said, this is one of the best defenses in the league. And specifically, I think they have the best defensive line going forward. You have JJ Watt finally coming back, and now he's finally going to be playing alongside Jadeveon Clowney, who's finally put everything together and is playing like a number 1 overall pick who was destined to be a franchise player on the defensive side of the ball. But that also being said, the biggest problem for them is, again, what you pointed to, which is the offensive line. Granted, yeah, they have Lamar Miller, who was a pretty decent running back last year. He wasn't a world beater, but he was able to get the job done and keep the offense going when Brock Osweiler was still quarterback. And they still have one of the best receivers in the league in DeAndre Hopkins. It's just, if they can't get the ball to either of them because they're getting tackled in the backfield, then I don't know. It's just you don't want to see that with a team that's been this close to going over the hump, but they're not really good at figuring out when their window is and actually committing to it. I don't know what's up with this team. I don't know what's up with ownership, but this team could be so much more, but they're a bit stubborn.
Yeah. I for one, I do think that Dwayne Brown asking for a multi-year extension as a 32-year-old tackle who's been declining the last couple of years. He's still a really good left tackle in the league. Don't get me wrong, but he's the second highest paid tackle in the NFL. Behind Tyron Smith. He's not one of the lower paid linemen in the league. And the structure of the NFL, this could be a discussion down the road, but that's just the way the league is run, is that there's no guaranteed contracts like the NBA or baseball. And for him to hold out, it's his personal decision. If money's not really a factor for him and he just wants to retire, then that's his decision, but really hurt this team. And like you mentioned, you have JJ Watt in the midst of his prime, and they often just hope Deshaun Watson's the real deal, get him in here either this year or next year. And you have to get new offensive linemen in there, obviously. But yeah, it's just the window is kind of messed up, and I agree with you on that. Also in the running backs front, Deontay Foreman, the Texas connection. He looks like a lot of people are, had him as a fantasy sleeper. So we'll see what production he gets in case Lamar Miller does get hurt. We already have Albert Blue banged up to start the year. So Deontay Foreman could get there sooner rather than later. But opening game is a divisional game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Texans have been really good in the division. That's basically why they've made the playoffs 2 years in a row, was their play in the admittedly mediocre AFC South. And so this is a huge division matchup. Jacksonville, obviously, they have similar offensive problems as the Texans, namely their quarterback position with Blake Bortles being a mess. They did draft Leonard Fournette, but that offensive line, I don't think it's that good. That defense, though, is good. So I expect this one to be a slug it out defensive battle. I mean, I'm going to pick the Texans to win a close one, because if they don't win this one, their seasons might be down in the dumps real quickly, because they have at Cincinnati, at New England coming up. So this is really a crucial game in week 1 that they need to start out well against a team that's expected to be one of the worst in football again.
Yeah, no, like you said, like to the benefit of the Houston Texans, they play in the AFC South. I don't know if you mentioned this also. I mean, like with the Colts, like, I mean, you have someone in Andrew Luck who's like, he's supposed to be your franchise quarterback, and he's supposed to be like not only that, but also a generational quarterback. And like, we're coming to the point where he was like drafted in which year was he drafted in? Like 2012? Yeah, 2012. He's 5 years into his career, and like, we don't even know if he's going to be able to make it for another 3. And that's just like kind of crazy. But that's also considered like, that's how badly managed this Colts team has been. And then you look at Jacksonville also. I mean, Jacksonville has always been this doormat, but I mean, like, they've done what the Texans have been unable to do, which is actually invest in their team. Unfortunately, also, like, they're still trying to, for the past few years, they've been trying to build around a quarterback that really didn't seem to be all that good at being a quarterback. And yet they did a very smart thing in not only signing a pretty decent offensive lineman, I can't remember his name, but they also drafted Leonard Fournette and Cam Robinson. And so it looks like this team is probably going to start to be built at least around that running game, which should take a lot of pressure off Blake Bortles. And then you also have, considering how good that receiving core is, they have a chance to be a decent to good offense. But it really depends on Blake Bortles and whether or not he can, at this point, even be a game manager. And that's even a big question, considering how like error prone he's been and how many interceptions he's thrown. And on the defensive side of the ball, like they signed AJ Boye, but they also have Jalen Ramsey in his second year, and like he's primed to become a shutdown corner. I mean, that secondary all around looks pretty good.
And front seven as well. They signed Calais Campbell.
They also have Dante Fowler has to really break through this year, but we'll see.
Who do you think wins the division as an outsider? Who wins the AFC South?
I still think it's the Texans. Wait, who else even?
Tennessee. Tennessee, man. That's as much as I hate to say it. I'm gonna pick Tennessee to win the division.
I can see it. Yeah,
they legitimately should have won it last year if Marcus Mariota doesn't get hurt in week 16 and they lose the Jaguars. They go into week 17 with a winner take all for the division. And I think they come out on top in that game. And granted, they're not an AFC elite. I don't think they're going to make the Super Bowl at all. But they have a softer schedule. And they just have the better quarterback play. I think their defense is better. I don't know if it's an elite defense, but it's better than it has been. So I'm going to go Tennessee to win the division.
I totally see that. Yeah. Again, as you said, Marcus Mariota is quickly becoming a franchise quarterback. You have that run game between not only run game, but you have that offensive line where you have those two tackles there that are Conklin and I can't remember the other one's name, but those, they're pretty much
one.
Yeah. And both are either are borderline Pro Bowl offensive tackles. They have a strong upfront game. Again, the biggest question going forward is going to be that wide receiving core. I believe they got Corey Davis in the draft this past year, really early on. To me, he was the best wide receiver available, and so I think that was a good pick. But
the running game should be good. DeMarco Murray, Derrick Henry,
exactly. Yep, so that 1-2 punch right there. They should be set with that. Again, it's just going to be that defensive side of the ball, whether or not they can really hold up. They did invest a few draft picks in the secondary.
Logan Ryan.
And they have Brian Arapco as a pass rusher. So, this is a team that, like seems to have like all the check boxes in terms of like how to be a good team and be able to make it into the playoffs. But I mean, at the end of the day too, like it's a show me league, and like if they can stifle JJ Watt and Jadeveon Clowney for long enough, then like sure, yeah, I'd go with Tennessee. But like right now, like kind of have to roll with the dice. I also think at the same time too, there's a good chance that maybe both make it into the playoffs. One as a wild card, one as the division winner. Which is it's as much as we've been ragging on the AFC South, like I mean it's not impossible, especially when you consider like you're going to be playing the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Indianapolis Colts minus Andrew Luck. You're going to play both those teams twice each, so a total of 4 games right there. That should be fairly winnable. Both these teams could very easily make it into the playoffs.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk briefly college football. Okay, describe UT San Jose State in one word for me.
Decent.
For me, it's I mean, they got a win today. Chris Warren was great. I don't know why they didn't run Chris Warren more last week, but he had a great game. Sam Ellinger was the fill-in quarterback today with Shane Buechele out, and he was good as well. I mean, it's just completely overmatched talent-wise. I mean, the defense also looked good. I think next week against USC is going to be a real test. I mean, this was just kind of a scrimmage against
real test. Yeah. Well, I mean, you could say now that the Maryland one was a real test, but yeah, I mean, we'll see how this team holds up next week. I mean, it's also another interesting note is that San Jose State has now played 3 games for the season, and their first game was actually against University of South Florida, which is interesting because not only are they ranked number 21 overall, but because they're now the new team that's being coached by Charlie Strong. San Jose State ended up losing that game 44-26. Granted, obviously USF does not have the same players or a level of talent that Texas has. I mean, in spite of all the losing, but it is interesting to sort of compare the two to some extent, especially in the way that USF is still ranked, but they did struggle at the beginning against San Jose State. But nonetheless, I mean, it's neither here nor there. Again, this Texas team really has to start focusing on fighting the Trojans. Obviously, when they first scheduled this, I think they were hoping for a bit more hype and hoping that maybe it'd still be like a nice rematch of the championship game back in 2006. But it should be fun, hopefully.
Let's move on to shout-outs. So first for me, JD Martinez, former Astro. He plays with the Diamondbacks now. He had 4 home runs in a game at Dodger Stadium. So, yeah, you don't usually see a guy go 4 for 4 with 4 home runs. So, congrats to him for making history. Shout out Tillman Fertitta for buying the Houston Rockets for $2.2 billion. That's now the maximum price ever paid for an NBA team. So he is a Houston area business owner, most famous for the Landry's chain. And I mean, obviously keep the team in Houston and hopefully continue the great legacy that the previous owner, Les Alexander, did. And finally, JJ Watt, again, he was named the NFL Players Association Community Most Valuable Player. His fundraising for Hurricane Harvey relief has surpassed $30 million now. So just amazing for him, and congrats.
Yeah, for sure. Will Millbrooks, shout out to you for being the first player ever in MLB with a pitch hit, triples in both games of a doubleheader. Like, I mean, that's very specific, but I mean, you're the first to do it, man. So congratulations. Also, I guess shout out to Justin Thomas for winning the Dell Technologies Championship by 3 strokes. And now the FedEx Cup standings, Spieth actually in first now because he finished second in said tournament and now leads Thomas by 27 points. Dustin Johnson moves down to third, which is kind of surprising, but hey, you know, it is what it is.
So I want you guys to visit our website, twnatesonsports.com. We still have the link to the JJ Watt fundraiser on our homepage. So if you want to contribute to that for Hurricane Harvey relief, it's up there. Also like us on Facebook at @TwoNatesOnSports. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, where you'll get a notification as soon as we release our new episodes. Nathan, happy football season, and I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, happy football season to you too, man.